Custom water cooling. It's a lot more popular than it's ever been, and the problem with that is you've got so many different parts to choose from. You got tons of different radiators and fans and pumps and reservoirs and fittings and tubing and Commander Pros and all this blocks and crap, and it'd be awesome if a company actually made a simple to use kit that contained everything you needed. And that's exactly what Corsair did. Designed to bring a balance of performance and cost to gamers, the BG5 M.2 SSD from Kioxia is an obvious choice. The BG5 SSD utilizes Kioxia's 5th generation 112-layer BiCS flash 3D memory and uses a DRAM-less architecture leveraging host memory buffer technology to maintain affordable power and efficiency. And for those needing a more robust storage and professional use, Kioxia CD7 features PCIe Gen 5 and 32 gigatransfers per second, perfect for enterprise and data center solutions. To see the complete list of storage options from Kioxia, whether it be for everyday use in PC gaming or professional enterprise and data center solutions, follow the sponsored link in the description below. So it was like 2019 or 2020, no, 2019 I believe, is when Corsair had really started to build up their Hydro X line. And their portfolio has clearly grown. And so, I mean, they've got fans, radiators now, reservoir pump combos, different kinds of blocks. We even have the JSUSense Edition block. Shameless plug, link down below. But when it comes to hard tubing, I mean, there's special tools that are needed. And you know, it makes sense that Corsair would put together a kit that has all of these components in just one spot. Because here's the thing, when I first started doing water cooling videos on YouTube, it was very simple. We had soft tubing that came in basically 2 different sizes. And then we had rigid tubing that essentially only came in 10 by 13. That means 10 millimeter inner diameter, 13 millimeter outer diameter, which means 1.5 millimeter wall thickness. Then 12 millimeter came out, then 16 millimeter came out, then 14 millimeter came out. And with hard tubing, it's not so hard to get fittings that fit because all you care about is the outer diameter. That's all that matters. But with soft tubing, you have inner diameter, outer diameter, the clamp, and all that matters. So with all the different types of tubing, different tubing sizes, all the different fittings, it's really easy to accidentally buy and grab something that doesn't fit. So having all of this come in a simple kit, this is the XH305i RGB Pro. I would have expected HX for Hydro X. Wait, XH305i. So I'm assuming, I'm gonna try and decipher this name because names are fun to decipher. Obviously X is extreme, H is Hydro. I'm assuming the 30 maybe has something to do with being a 360 rad, because this is a 360 rad version. And the 5i has to do with the fact that it's the XD5 pump res combo. And then the RGB, well, that's self-explanatory. And then Pro, because it has a Commander. I honestly don't know how they came up with this name, but it doesn't really matter. I just felt like trying to decipher that and decode it. Anyway, so opening up the box. I'm never gonna get this repackaged, guys. Look, I'm never gonna get this repackaged. Screw you, Phil. I'm gonna take a photo of it. Boom. All right, so we'll start with the XD5 RGB reservoir. Quite literally, like the exact same thing I had out here a second ago. Dang it. It's literally the exact same thing. So this is a D5 pump in it. D5 is a nice quiet pump. It doesn't have to spin fast to move through blocks and such. Radiators, blocks, fittings, tubing, they're all resistance, and you want a nice pump to be able to push through all that. And the fact that it's a reservoir combo means you are getting one less connection to have to deal with, because you have to have a reservoir feeded pump. And if it's just feeding it in the same unit, that makes it simple. The XC7 RGB Pro water block. So it's not as cool as the JSUSense block, but it'll get the job done. It's got RGB and it's Pro. The more pros, the better. It is also LGA 1700. So it does have the 1700 bracket in there that's needed for Intel 12th gen. This is a Commander Pro. We've seen this a million times. This is to connect our fans, to connect our RGB lighting to, so that we can have one hub controlling all of the Corsair lighting. So there is that. One thing that's nice about Corsair Commander Pro and IQ is the fact that it does actually have a mode in there and a plugin that will allow it to control ASUS Aura lighting if you're using an ASUS motherboard. So that's a nice thing to have. It's starting to get a little bit more kind of cross compatibility, but still it is RGB in today's day and age. Whew. Squeezy bottle. This is, oh. Okay, so it's just one of the RGB modules like that connect to the Commander Pro. So your lights connect to this connects to the Commander Pro tells this what to tell the lights to do. Why that still isn't just contained in the Commander Pro, I don't know. I think it's time, Corsair, that we consolidate all these little extra modules into one thing. It's already this big, why not? I will harp on Corsair until they do that. I love them. I even teamed up with them for my block. Crap like that needs to stop. I won't stop until we enact change around here. So this is our fittings. They just didn't put them in individual boxes because save on packaging. So these are compressions that also have 90-degree fittings in there. So this is the part that probably they went back and forth on how many to include of each thing. So there's 2 fittings per component, right? So if you have a CPU block, that's 2 fittings. If you have a radiator, that's 2 fittings. If you have a pump reservoir combo, that's also 2 fittings. So you need, in a CPU loop only, a minimum of 2, 4, 6 fittings, and that's our 360 rad. Again, the XR5, which is exactly the same as what I showed you behind. If you add other things like a GPU block, well, there's 2 more fittings that you need. If you add like a distro plate, there's a guaranteed 2 more fittings that you need. So every component needs an input and an output, or an inlet and an outlet. So those are why we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3. So we have 2 extra. And 2 90-degree fittings right here. So this just makes it easier if, depending on the routing you're trying to go with, you might need to have it kind of come off at a weird angle or something. Instead of trying to make that bend, because you do have a finite amount of tubing, you're gonna wanna make sure that, well, you do your best that you can to try and figure out your routing before you start bending. This is our fluid. It's a clear XL8. It's a premix. Hey, they changed the bottle some. It's more stubby. I like it. Anyway, it's a clear premix. It's gonna have your inhibitors in there, which is gonna stop growth. It's gonna have your anti-corrosion additives so that you're not gonna have galvanic corrosion build up in your copper parts. Copper parts and fluid and oxygen, because there's gonna be oxygen in the loop because there's never a way to get all the oxygen out, causes galvanic corrosion in copper parts. So that's got anti-corrosive properties in there. We've also got our 3 QL120 fans. So these are the newer fans that have an inner ring and an outer ring and a rear ring. That just basically, it's like the light loops on steroids. They're just even more lights. 3 of those because we have a triple rad fan. And then last but not least in this box, we have our XT Hardline toolkit. This is the part that is gonna be, I think, making most people grateful for this kit because it comes with everything you need to just even have a chance at doing hardline bending. To heat up tubing and bend it, you need a mandrel. You have to put something inside the tubing. If you don't, when you heat it and you bend it, it will just crush. The mandrel forces it to keep its shape. So just, if anyone here has ever watched like people bend exhaust pipe or something, if you bend the pipe with just a normal bender, you get a slight crush to it. But the mandrel, which basically is like a flexible piece that goes in the tube and bends it, forces it to keep its shape. So it stretches one side and kind of compresses the other rather than having it squish. It also has a little hacksaw in here. It has a little cutting guide, like a clamp that you can put down on the table and it helps you keep straight cuts. And then it has a guide in there for bending. So here's our mandrel. I kind of wish this was longer because sometimes you have to go farther down the tube to make your bend, but this is gonna slide inside of your tubing. This is our deburr tool, has both inside and outside deburr. So when you cut, they get some jagged edges. You got the pointy side, which goes in the tube and cuts the inside. You flip it over and you have the radial blades out there, which will smooth the outside. That way you get nice smooth cuts. This is our bending tool right here. So we have these little rubber stops right here. So if you see, these have measurements on them, you can pull this out and move it up so that if you knew exactly how far you wanted before the bend, you could use these stops. That way you don't go too far. You do have 2 90-degree bending sides with angle markers on them. So you've got 45 degree, 90 degree, what is it, 135 or something I believe is the next one, and then 180. So those markings are on there to help you figure out what your bend radius needs to be. So it measures here 30 millimeters to the first stop, and then it's 10 millimeters every next stop. So you have to do the addition on that, by the way. So 30 plus 3 of those would be 30 plus 30, that's 60 millimeters. Simple enough. Here's the little bending cutting tool I was telling you about, or cutting tool. So you would just kind of put this on the edge of your surface like that. You can put the tubing in there, sort of clamp it down, and then you can just cut right along the edge to make a nice straight cut with your tubing. And then to make that cut, they also provide a hacksaw with an appropriate plastic blade. You don't want a metal blades, or you don't want a wood blade. Wood blades are very coarse because it's designed to rip through the wood. You want the fine teeth, which is very similar to what you find on a metal cutting disc or blade, which is gonna make, small cuts over time to make a cleaner cut. Otherwise it'd be way too gouged to get anything like presentable. Then you'd be sitting there deburring forever, and then you might make it a little bit too short. Let's take a look at the tubing real quick. I'm curious as to how much you get here and what color it is. I'm assuming it's gonna be clear. It's obviously shorter than the tubing kit I showed right here. I bet it's half the length. Yep, that looks about half right there. So there's gonna be a challenge with this because sometimes you need a fairly decent run length to get from, say, the reservoir to the CPU. So how much do they give you here? 6 tubes that measure, well, if these are 1,000 millimeters, these are gonna be 500 millimeters. So you don't get a whole lot of additional length to play around with. One of the things I do when I build systems like this is I will intentionally make the ends too long, and then I will cut them down to the right length. Like I'll do like an S bend or a 90-degree bend and then cut them down. You will definitely want to maybe invest in more tubing if it's your first hardline tube. It's not that expensive. I firmly believe it'd be worth buying like another pack of 500 millimeter to go along with this. If you're adding a GPU to your loop, you already have to buy the GPU block anyway. Just do yourself a favor, buy at least another kit of the 500 times 6 or the 1000 times 4. That way you just know you have plenty of length. But because this is 14 millimeter tube, which by the way is my new absolute favorite size, it's not, so 12 millimeter looks really tiny. It's a thinner wall and it likes to sort of lose some of its shape when you bend 12 millimeter. 13 millimeter, not nearly as bad, but 16 millimeters way too thick. The extra interior diameter, although it helps a little bit with back pressure and flow, it's a little bit harder to work with. Thicker wall makes it harder to bend, and the bend radiuses are bigger so that it makes it harder to line things up. 14 millimeter is my absolute favorite to work with. All my builds have been 14 millimeter for a long time. My personal build, which I'm gonna be finishing up here after I get back from vacation, is also 14 millimeter. So the compression fittings go exactly as we showed a million times. You've got this little locking collar right here. You've got the O-ring, which this O-ring does not seal. This O-ring is all about friction to hold the tube in place. You've got an inner O-ring inside the fitting right there, which is actually responsible for your seal. So you'll slide the collar on, slide the O-ring on, slide this down inside the fitting. It's a lot easier when it's attached to something. Slide the collar down. And so with the parts they provide you, that is basically what it ends up looking like. Obviously coming out of your CPU block, your reservoir pump combo, and your radiator. If you want to try giving hardline tubing a try, there's a couple things you're gonna need that don't come with this kit. A heat gun, we keep ours up there. You can get those fairly inexpensive at like Home Depot or Lowe's, 15 bucks. Don't need anything super expensive or super fancy. You're also gonna they say use gloves. I'm fairly heat resistant with my hands. I can touch hot things. You might want to use a glove because when you heat up the tubing, the heat does radiate and it does get pretty warm. And then a measuring tape, obviously, to do your measuring. But beyond that, they give you pretty much everything you need. They even have a little guide here in the manual that shows you kind of like how to heat up put in the mandrel, heat up a radius, and that rotation means twist and turn. You want to heat up both like 360 around the tube evenly. All right, shows you how to use the bender tool. Pretty straightforward. But I love seeing stuff like this because when I first started this channel, this kind of stuff didn't exist. It didn't. You had individual companies that were making stuff and then it was up to you to make sure everything was compatible and worked. I've even recently had my fair share of not double checking when I'm buying and having something come in and get a little unpleasant surprise that, oops, I noobed it and I got two parts that don't fit together or work together. And so I had to then rush order replacement stuff. And that is the, unfortunate life of custom water cooling, and it happens all the time. So when you have everything in a kit like this, it takes all the guesswork out of it. You now know, if I want to add more parts, this is the size fitting that I need. It has it all listed out, like what size they are and stuff, right here, part numbers and everything, so you can match the part number. You know what size tubing you have, get more of the exact same tubing, and you're golden. So anyway, this kit just launched. I'm kind of happy to see it. Other brands have started doing stuff similar to this, but right now Corsair probably has one of the largest portfolio of water cooling parts that have wide CPU compatibility. Obviously AM4, AM3, all the LGA sockets. I'm sure they'll come out with some sort of a retention bracket to adapt their blocks to whatever AM5 is going to end up being like for AMD. And it's just nice to see this become much more mainstream. To be honest, it feels like Corsair is trying to put me out of a job here, because I've been known as the water cooling guy on YouTube. And Corsair is becoming known as the water cooling company. And you know what? I feel attacked, which is why I teamed up with them for my water block. Make friends out of your enemies. We were never enemies. Or were we?